We are using countless ways to bring back our hostages.
I will not sit in a government that raises a white flag.
I think of them all the time, of their families and their suffering.
God forbid the government should adopt this surrender offer.
I believe that if a real deal is on the table, Netanyahu will vote for a new deal.
We will work to replace the failed leadership with new leadership.
Welcome to the day. Last Friday, it seemed like there was genuine progress in ending months of destruction and bloodshed in Gaza. US President Joe Biden outlined a three-part plan for an Israeli-Hamas ceasefire, which he said came from the Israelis. But today, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made clear that there will be no truce without his government's conditions being met. And any claims to the contrary are incorrect. Here's his spokesperson explaining the disconnect.
He said, and I quote, "The outline that President Biden presented is partial. The war will be stopped for the purpose of returning hostages, and then we will proceed with further discussions."
Well, Mr. Netanyahu's under increasing pressure from Washington to end the war, but he's also facing pushback from his far-right coalition partners. They've criticised the draft deal as reckless and tantamount to surrender if it's signed without the elimination of Hamas. Two ministers are threatening to sink the fragile Netanyahu coalition government over the plan.
If the government chooses to adopt this offer of surrender, we will not be part of the government, and we will work to replace the failed leadership with new leadership, which knows how to make decisions to win the war, decisions which destroy Hamas, bring home the hostages, hit Hezbollah, and allow residents in the north to safely return to their homes.
Well, the White House maintains the ceasefire plan is good for Gaza and good for Israel. National Security spokesman John Kirby said the intention of President Biden's speech last week was to pressure Hamas to accept the deal and not to put Netanyahu in a bind.
This wasn't about jamming the prime minister or the war cabinet. This was about laying bare for the public to see how well and how faithfully and how assertively the Israelis came up with a new proposal. How it shows how much they really want to get this.
Ehud Olmert was Prime Minister of Israel from 2006 to 2009 and joins us now from Jerusalem. Welcome back to DW. Could we start with today's news that 4 hostages being held by Hamas have been confirmed dead by the Israeli military? That was just in the last couple of hours.
Yeah, this is very sad news, as you can imagine. We are losing them almost day by day. 2 weeks ago, we thought that we have 133. Now we have 120, which means that 13 of the hostages that we thought were held by the Hamas somewhere in Gaza underground are now dead. And every day that passes, they bring worse news. So they need to reach an agreement that will bring back all the hostages is quite urgent.
Right. And you're of the opinion that this news means that we should move more urgently in the direction of a ceasefire deal rather than more urgently in the direction of destroying Hamas?
Well, I thought maybe a few months ago already that we have reached a point where we have achieved most of what we set out to achieve in the military operation in the first place, and that we don't need to continue the war. And I definitely think that now it's overtime. We need to stop the war now, and we have to accept the proposal which was presented by President Biden, which I now know that actually was submitted by the Israeli government, and that hopefully will bring us to the point where we can make an exchange of all the hostages so that we'll bring them back.
And what
we don't want to get them in.
Forgive me, please continue.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, what do you make of the confusion surrounding that ceasefire proposal, apparently signed off by Israeli negotiators, announced to the world by an American president, and now disavowed by the Israeli Prime Minister? What do you think is going on?
I wish I could tell you. I wish that someone would be able to explain and to understand the policy of our government. It appeared to me from the beginning that while it was possibly submitted by Israel, that the main question was not whether Biden supports this plan, but whether the Israeli government supports the plan which was presented by the Israeli government. This, I think, just indicates again the degree of confusion and a lack of leadership by the Israeli Prime Minister. The choice is very simple and it's very clear. It's not easy, but it's simple. The only way to get back the hostages is to stop the war. It is what I think we should do anyway, because we have reached a point where any further military confrontation will not lead us into any great achievement. So we can, at the end, lose the hostages and not achieve that kind of complete victory that Netanyahu was talking about. So this is the time. The only problem is that, as we all know, and I'm sure that you know very well, that the Israeli Prime Minister is held and he's squeezed, and perhaps is extorted by his political partners that say in the most explicit manner that they will leave the government and they will break down the coalition if this plan, which was, as we know now, submitted by Israel but was presented by President Biden, will be accepted by Israel formally and openly, which will lead into the end, or at least a temporary end, of the war for maybe 82 days, which means practically ending the war. And the Prime Minister has now to make a choice, what he wants more, to risk the stability of his government and bring back the hostages, or to maintain the stability of his government at the cost of lives of the remaining 120 Israeli hostages still held by these murderers.
And it sounds like you're quite clear that you believe that he should go for this deal and end the war quicker.
Absolutely. I thought that we should have gone to this deal long before, even before this was the proposal, in maybe 2 or 3 other occasions, which took place earlier over the last few months. But certainly now it has reached a point where it is absolutely clear that every day that passes may cause the loss of more lives of the hostages. And we are not moving anywhere in the military operation that is of any significance that can make a difference in terms of the overall balance. So I think we have beaten the Hamas in a very significant way. They lost more than 12,000 of their fighters, their tunnels, their headquarters, their command position, the launchers, the rockets. They almost completely lost them. They probably have few more that they can shoot, but they have lost the bulk of it. And so there is no need and no real interest of Israel to continue this military operation and risking the life of these people and losing the support of the international community, which we have greatly lost anyway, and also maybe also killing unnecessarily more innocent civilians or amongst Palestinians.
Okay.
There's no justification for it. So altogether, if you look at the broader aspect of what is going on, the time has come for a complete cessation of the military operation. Immediately afterwards, when the hostages will be returned, we have to pull out from Gaza. There should be an international intervention force that will take over. Preferably, it should be a Palestinian together with moderate Arab countries. But if they are not ready yet, which I think they are not, there should be an international European intervention force for a period of time. I know that European countries are not happy about this option, but they were not happy in 2006 towards the end of the Second Lebanese War, and yet they took part in the military force that were brought to the south of Lebanon, and that has created a ceasefire for 17 years.
Right, so
there is a advantage in doing this, and I hope it will be done soon.
So it sounds like you certainly have an idea of what happens the day after, which, of course, is what Benny Gantz needs to hear from Benjamin Netanyahu if he also isn't to quit this government in 2 days. How should Mr. Netanyahu respond to that threat from Benny Gantz?
I'm not certain that I'm the best advisor to Prime Minister Netanyahu. As far as I'm concerned, Netanyahu should disappear altogether so that we can establish a new government that will be responsible and serious and courageous and have a vision about the future of this region altogether, which I'm not sure Netanyahu is the guy. I'm certain that he's not the guy. So, on the one hand, the obvious is that Gantz and Eisenkot should leave the cabinet not in 2 days, but tonight. On the other hand, if Netanyahu will choose to accept the proposal which he himself submitted to President Biden and will agree to a ceasefire now and to the end of the war now, it can give a good reason for Gantz and Eisenkot to remain in the cabinet, at least for a while, in order to allow this to take place. Netanyahu doesn't have a problem in terms of the majority in parliament to accept this, because all the opposition will vote for the plan which was submitted for the ceasefire. But as I said before, problem is that Netanyahu doesn't think about what's good for Israel, but what's good for Netanyahu. And it appears that it's not good for Netanyahu to end the war now because he will lose his government.
Thank you for talking to us and talking us through that. Ehud Olmert, a former Prime Minister of Israel. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Plan for a ceasefire. Well, Yossi Beilin served in a variety of ministerial positions in the Israeli government before retiring from politics in 2008. He was also one of the architects of the 1993 Oslo Accords. He's now a journalist and business consultant. Welcome to DW. Let's start with this disputed peace plan, apparently signed off by Israeli negotiators, announced to the world by an American president, and now apparently disavowed by an Israeli prime minister. What do you think is going on?
Well, it is very strange. Apparently, Netanyahu's war cabinet decided to suggest some ideas to Hamas through Qatar or other channel, but did not announce it. And so other ministers of his government were not aware of it. Mainly because he was worried that since they belong to the extreme rightist group, they would torpedo the ideas of the smaller cabinet. And here, President Biden did something which was very smart in my view. He exposed Netanyahu and said, this is your plan, this is what you sent to the other side. What we would like to see is that you stick to your own ideas. And Netanyahu found himself in the corner. He could not deny it. He just said that it was not the full offer, but only parts of it or something like that, which nobody took too seriously. So it is now up to the Hamas to decide whether they accept it or not. And I hope that it will really change the situation and enable us to have a ceasefire in which the hostages will be released.
And now we have right-wing elements of Mr. Netanyahu's fragile coalition threatening to leave, to bring it down, if this is acted on. What do you think he should do? Should he call their bluff?
I think that there is no real problem because, first of all, it is time to get rid of them. There are really a bunch of lunatics who were never participated in any previous government. Netanyahu himself promised only 2 or 3 years ago that they will never be part of his government. But when he found that without them he could not form a government, he decided to breach his promise. Now he has an opportunity to get rid of the whole group and to get a safety net for his coalition from the center-left parties which promised him this safety net. And I think that is what he should do. Have a long ceasefire. In that time, get the assurance that all the hostages are free, and begin to negotiate with the Palestinians on the permanent agreement, something that he said that is not urgent for him to begin.
So is it your understanding then that Mr. Netanyahu, without these right-wing extremists, would actually be more amenable to some sort of ceasefire deal? Because the mood music that we hear around this is that he's prolonging this war in order to stop himself from having to face the music on various criminal charges. But you seem to see him as being held hostage by the right-wing elements in his government.
He was not held hostage. He invented them. I mean, his idea to ask them to join the cabinet was, in my view, the worst thing that he did. And the ramifications were endless. So he is not their hostage. He can and should get rid of them and assure himself that he has a safety net, and he will have a safety net. So he doesn't have to worry about him continuing to be the prime minister for the coming months. Whether he has a secret plan to prolong the war forever in order for the court to have mercy on him and not to judge him harshly because he's in the middle of the war, this is a guess. I don't know whether this is true or not. It is not a question of effect. The question of the fact is only that he has a government, even if these people leave him.
And finally, and briefly, if you wouldn't mind, you helped negotiate the 1993 Oslo Accords. What do you think is missing now that made peace possible then?
An Israeli leader who is willing to make peace with the Palestinians and to partition the land in order for the two peoples to live side by side and fulfill their right for self-determination.
Thank you so much for explaining that so clearly. Yossi Beilin, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Let's see if we can work out what's going on with DW correspondents Benjamin Alvarez-Gruber in Washington, D.C. and Tania Krämer in Jerusalem. Welcome both. Let's start with you, Tania. Why is the Israeli government now apparently distancing itself from a ceasefire plan that President Biden says they approved?
Well, that's very much discussed here as well. And the way it's being seen here is that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is trying to reframe in a way or to put a different spin on the outlines that were given by President Joe Biden on Friday night, in a way to counter the anticipated criticism by some of his own cabinet members, especially from the far right. They have threatened to walk out of the government if such a deal or agreement would go through. But also Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu himself has said it time and time again also in a statement that, Israel won't end the war and that it needs to continue the war to eliminate Hamas. And this is one of the main disparities here between the outline that we've been hearing from US President Joe Biden and, what Israel is trying to say here. The sticking point also, that is a sticking point actually not just for Israel, Israel, but also for Hamas. And what actually we're seeing in this outline that was given is that the first phase would be a temporary ceasefire where some of the hostages would be released, and then both sides would have to continue negotiating to come to this permanent ceasefire and the release of the other hostages that will remain until then in Gaza. But also Hamas, of course, has to agree to this, and we are still waiting for an official response. But there's no doubt, and we just heard it, tonight the army declared 4 more hostages that were killed in captivity in Gaza. And of course, the public pressure as well is mounting on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to come to a decision.
So, Benjamin Alvarez-Gruber in Washington, does this Israeli backtracking over the plan the president presented 3 days ago, does this leave President Biden with egg on his face?
The White House says that what's important also to see how other regional partners are looking at this proposal. And there have been many comments coming out from Washington on this topic. Jake Sullivan, the U.S. National Security Advisor, said Israel has shown willingness to agree to a ceasefire and hostage release by this deal that was set out by President Biden. And the White House is insisting that this peace plan was Israel's own and was not drafted by Washington to put pressure on its allies. Some people have been suggested, and that still seems to be necessary, as many still wonder why it was a U.S. president and not an Israeli prime minister presenting what President Biden called this Israeli proposal.
So all this backtracking, this must be stretching an already fraught relationship between Mr. Biden and Mr. Netanyahu.
That's right, and frustration is growing with the Israeli government among U.S. officials, but there is mixed signaling here again, because there's another aspect here, not just the frustration behind closed doors. What's also happening is this bipartisan invitation, so from both Republicans and Democrats, to invite Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu to deliver an address to Congress that was confirmed also on Friday after President Biden laid out this proposal for a 3-phase ceasefire. So a push that can be seen as trying to raise Netanyahu's political standing in Israel. So the timing here is important, because if this speech takes place actually before there is an agreement, it might be used even by Netanyahu to argue against the deal. And this visit, of course, it will also be kind of awkward for Democratic Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, who supported this letter and this invitation and who has previously called for Israel to hold new elections in Israel.
And Tania, Krämer, what's your take? How long and how hard can this Israeli government test the Biden administration's patience?
Well, I think there's a sense here that there are two sides who need to make, to come to this agreement. And so far, I think there's a sense here that the U.S. has been patient, at least so far. But of course, there's also a sense that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has to come to a decision. He hasn't taken that until now, and now it's the time to go forward.
OK, thank you for that, Tania. Tania Krämer in Jerusalem, Benjamin Alvarez-Gruber in Washington. Thank you both.